How did Native Americans keep warm without fire? Their methods will surely surprise you. In a world where heat is available at the flick of a switch, we have forgotten that cold is not just a low temperature, but an ancient force that humanity has struggled with for millennia. The indigenous peoples of North America did not have central heating or modern insulation. Their only ally was the wisdom honed by centuries of observing nature. They learned not just to resist the cold, but to work with it, using the laws of physics that we are only beginning to rediscover. Their methods were so effective that they allowed them to survive in conditions that today seem deadly to us. It was a quiet war for every degree of warmth, where bison hides, dry grass, and even their own breath served as weapons. Watch the video to the end to learn how a single stone, heated in a special way, could replace a stove for an entire night, and why Native Americans deliberately built their homes incorrectly from the point of view of modern architecture. What if I told you that the main secret to survival in the cold was not in your hands, but in your head? For indigenous peoples, winter was not a disaster, but a natural and necessary part of the cycle of life. They did not fight it, but accepted it, changing their lifestyle and way of thinking. Psychological preparation began long before the first snowfall. The whole tribe shifted to a different rhythm, slower and more contemplative. It was a time for storytelling, crafts, and strengthening social bonds within the confines of their winter dwellings. The elders told stories about the spirits of winter and heroes who defeated the cold with cunning rather than force. These stories taught people not to fear the cold, but to respect it and understand its language. Fear of the cold was considered more dangerous than the cold itself, as it paralyzed the will and the mind. People learned to perceive the cold not as an enemy, but as a strict teacher. It forced them to be more attentive, inventive, and work as a team. Every member of the community knew that survival was only possible by working together and helping each other. Meditative practices and rituals helped control their inner state. The ability to calm the mind and focus on inner warmth was as important a skill as the ability to light a fire. They believed that the inner fire of the spirit could warm the body. They observed nature and saw that life did not die, but only fell asleep under the snow. This gave them confidence that winter was finite and that spring would surely follow. This belief was a powerful psychological fuel that warmed them in the most severe frosts. Instead of complaining about the hardships, they found beauty and opportunity in winter. It was a time to rest from the labors of summer, to spend time with family, and to reflect deeply. This positive attitude helped them endure physical hardship more easily. They understood that panic and despair burn internal resources much faster than any frost. Calmness and acceptance of the situation were the key to conserving energy and heat. It was this mental shield that was their first and main line of defense. Modern science confirms this ancient wisdom. Stress causes blood vessels to constrict, leading to faster heat loss. A calm and focused person freezes much more slowly. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. How important do you think psychological preparation is in modern extreme conditions? Write about it in the comments. Want to know the secret that bison hides have kept for centuries? The art of dressing for cold weather among indigenous peoples was perfected and based on the principle of layering, which we still use today. However, their understanding of materials and how they interact was much deeper than ours. The first layer, worn next to the skin, was made of soft suede or the skin of young deer. Its main purpose was to wick moisture away from the body. They intuitively understood that wet clothing was the main enemy in the fight for warmth. The second layer was insulating. It was made of fur with a thick undercoat, beaver, rabbit, or fox. The air trap between the fibers created a warm layer that kept body heat from escaping. The top protective layer was made of thick and durable bison or moose leather. It was treated with fat to make it waterproof. This layer protected against wind and wet snow, keeping the inner layers dry. It was important that the clothing was not tight-fitting. The loose cut allowed air to circulate between the layers, creating additional insulating layers. It was a whole system of air pockets that worked like a thermos. Special attention was paid to the feet. Moccasins were sewn from several layers of leather and insulated with fur on the inside. Dry grass or moss was used as an additional insole, which not only insulated but also absorbed sweat. Leggings and pants were also multi-layered. They protected not only from the cold, but also from prickly bushes and thorns. The design allowed for easy movement, which was critical during hunting. Fur hats protected the head, which loses a significant amount of heat. Mittens lined with fur were much warmer than gloves, as the fingers kept each other warm. All clothing was modular. Depending on the weather and level of activity, one of the layers could be removed or added. This allowed for fine-tuning body temperature and avoiding overheating and dangerous perspiration. What do you think was the most important piece of clothing for survival in winter conditions? But clothing is only the first line of defense. Are you ready to learn how indigenous peoples turned ordinary stones into personal heaters that worked for hours? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of warmth that did not require fire inside the home. One of the most unique and effective methods of heating was the use of heated stones. This method allowed the heat of the fire to be safely transferred inside the home, avoiding smoke and the risk of fire. Not all stones were suitable for this purpose. Native Americans chose dense, smooth river stones without cracks, usually made of basalt or granite. They knew that porous or cracked stones could explode when heated due to the expansion of internal moisture. The process began outside the living space. A large fire was lit outside, and the selected stones were placed in the center. They were heated for several hours until they became red hot. Then came the most crucial moment: transportation. The hot stones were removed from the fire using long sticks or spears made of raw wood. They had to be carried into the dwelling without dropping them or causing a fire. Inside the teepee or longhouse, the stones were placed in specially dug pits in the center. This prevented accidental contact with them and kept the heat longer. The pit could be lined with a layer of sand for better insulation. Such a stone became the center of heat in the dwelling. It slowly and evenly released the accumulated energy, radiating soft infrared heat for many hours. The whole family would gather around it to warm up on long winter evenings. Smaller heated stones were used as individual warmers. They were wrapped in several layers of leather or fabric. Such a warmer could be placed in bed before going to sleep to warm up the sleeping area. This technology was especially important for heating sick or elderly people. The directed heat helped relieve joint pain and maintain a stable body temperature. It was a simple but effective form of physical therapy. In the morning, when the stones cooled down, they could be reused. The cycle was repeated every day. This system required labor and knowledge, but provided a safe and stable source of heat throughout the night. Thus, Native Americans used fire only as a tool to charge their stone batteries. The living space itself remained free of smoke and carbon monoxide. It was an ingenious system of separating the energy source from the heating device. What if I showed you how the sun became the main ally in the fight against frost? Indigenous peoples understood the value of sunlight and heat and actively used it in their architecture. The location of a winter camp or individual dwelling was never random. Winter camps were always located on the southern or southeastern slopes of hills. This location provided protection from the prevailing north and west winds. In addition, the southern slope received the maximum amount of sunlight during the short winter days. The entrance to the dwelling, whether it was a teepee or a wigwam, almost always faced east. This was done so that the first rays of the morning sun would shine inside, warming the space after a cold night. It also had a sacred meaning, welcoming the sunrise. Sometimes a snowbank was deliberately piled up behind the dwelling on the north side. This bank served as an additional wind barrier. Snow, being an excellent insulator, protected the wall from freezing. The white surface of the snow around the dwelling acted as a giant reflector. The sun's rays reflecting off the snow fell on the walls and entrance, warming them further. Thus, not only direct, but also reflected solar radiation was used. The time of activity was also adjusted to the movement of the sun. The most labor-intensive work was done in the middle of the day, when the sun was high and provided the most heat. This allowed people to conserve their internal resources. Skins and clothing were regularly taken out into the sun to dry. Sunlight not only removed moisture, but also killed bacteria. Dry clothes and bedding were key to keeping warm. Even in forested regions, they chose places with fewer trees for their winter camps. This allowed sunlight to reach the ground and dwellings unobstructed. Each tree was seen as a potential barrier to precious heat. They understood that heat could be stored. The dark surfaces of the skins used to make dwellings absorb the sun's heat well during the day. At night, this stored heat was slowly released inside. Have you ever thought about how important the angle of the sun's rays is? The sun provided heat during the day, but what about at night? In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans built their dwellings to conserve every degree of precious heat. The design of traditional indigenous dwellings was a true engineering marvel, perfectly adapted to conserve heat. The teepees of the Plains tribes were not just cones made of poles and skins. They were complex systems that controlled air and heat flows. The conical shape of the teepee made it incredibly wind-resistant. The wind simply flowed around it without putting pressure on the walls. This minimized heat loss through gaps and seams. A key element of the teepee was the inner lining, or ozon. This was a strip of skins that was attached to the poles at a height of 1.5 to 2 meters and hung down to the floor. It created an air gap between the outer wall and the living space. This air gap worked like double glazing in modern windows. Cold air that penetrated the outer covering from below rose up in this gap and exited through the smoke hole. It did not enter the living area, creating an effective thermal curtain. Outside at the base, teepees were often covered with turf or sprinkled with snow. This completely sealed the bottom edge, eliminating drafts. The floor inside was covered with several layers of skins, cutting off the cold coming from the frozen ground. The longhouses of the Iroquois were a different but equally effective system. Their elongated shape with rounded ends also had good aerodynamics. The massive walls of bark and logs were good insulators in themselves. Inside, the longhouses were divided into family compartments. This created many small spaces that were easier to heat with body heat. The common central passageway remained cooler. The walls of the longhouses were additionally insulated from the inside. They were covered with woven mats and skins. This created a multi-layered insulation similar to that used in clothing. The ceilings in such houses were quite low. This reduced the total volume of air that needed to be heated. Warm air accumulated under the ceiling, creating a comfortable zone on the sleeping platforms. Thus, any traditional dwelling was not just a shelter, but a passive heat retention system. Every element of its design, from its shape to its materials, was aimed at one goal: to keep precious heat inside. Are you ready to learn the truth about what the warmest bed in pre-Columbian America looked like? Nighttime is the coldest and most dangerous time of winter. Therefore, great attention was paid to the organization of the sleeping area because people are most vulnerable to the cold while they sleep. In most dwellings, sleeping places were raised above ground level. These could be wooden bunks, as in longhouses, or simply a thick layer of branches and grass. This was done to avoid sleeping on the cold ground and to avoid drafts that sweep across the floor. The base of the bed was a multi-layered insulating pie. The bottom layer consisted of thick spruce or pine branches. The needles created a springy and well-ventilated mattress that did not clump together and trapped air. A layer of dry grass, moss, or woven reed mats was laid on top of the branches. This layer filled in the gaps and made the bed softer. Most importantly, it served as additional insulation. The next layer was a thick bison or bear skin with the fur facing up. The thick fur created a final barrier that did not let the cold from below through. On such a bedding, it was already possible to sleep in warmth. The same bison hides or rabbit skins sewn together were used as blankets. Often, people slept without taking off most of their fur clothing. This created a cocoon effect that retained body heat. On particularly cold nights, the whole family slept together. People lay close to each other, warming each other with their body heat. This was the simplest and most effective way to survive extreme cold. They often took the heated stones we mentioned earlier to bed with them. Wrapped in skins, they continued to give off heat for several hours. It was a personal heating system for the sleeping area. They also tried to keep their heads warm by using fur hoods or simply covering themselves with a skin over their heads. They breathed through a small opening. The warm air they exhaled further heated the space inside such a cocoon. What do you think is more important? A warm blanket or a warm bedding? But even the warmest bed is useless without proper insulation of the dwelling itself. Next, we will reveal the secrets of natural insulators that were available to everyone. In addition to skins and furs, indigenous peoples skillfully used plant materials for insulation. Forests, fields, and swamps were a veritable storehouse of highly effective insulators for them. All you needed to know was what to use and how to use it. One of the best insulators was dry sphagnum moss. This moss, which grows in swamps, has unique properties. When dried, it can absorb a huge amount of moisture while remaining light and loose. Sphagnum moss was stuffed into moccasins to keep feet dry and warm. It was also used to caulk cracks in the walls of log or frame houses. This natural sealant was no worse than its modern counterparts. Another valuable material was dry grass. It was collected in summer and autumn, carefully dried, and stored in a place protected from moisture. In winter, this grass was used to stuff mattresses and as insoles. The fluff of cattails, which grow on the banks of water bodies, was a natural analog of cotton wool. This light and warm material was used to stuff children's clothes and as a filler for sleeping bags. It retained heat well thanks to its fibrous structure. Tree bark, especially birch bark, served as an excellent waterproofing and windproofing material. It was used to cover the roofs of wigwams and other frame dwellings. Layering the bark created a reliable barrier against the elements. The needles of coniferous trees, especially pine and spruce, were also put to good use. A thick layer of dry pine needles on the floor of a dwelling served not only as insulation, but also as a natural disinfectant. The essential oils contained in the needles purified the air. In regions where longhouses were built, the space between the inner and outer wall cladding could be filled with a mixture of clay and dry grass. This mixture, when dry, turned into a durable and warm material similar to adobe. Even fallen leaves were put to use. A thick layer of dry leaves piled at the base of the outer wall of the dwelling created an additional insulating layer. It protected the lower part of the building from freezing. Thus, a whole arsenal of available natural materials was used for insulation. Knowledge of their properties and correct application made it possible to create warm and comfortable dwellings. It was true eco-architecture based on harmony with nature. In harsh winter conditions, survival alone was virtually impossible. Therefore, one of the main ways to conserve heat was social. People came together to generate and conserve collective heat. Large winter dwellings, such as the longhouses of the Iroquois or the dugouts of the Plateau tribes, were designed to accommodate several families. Dozens of people in one enclosed space generated a tremendous amount of heat. This was enough to keep the temperature inside significantly higher than outside. The daily routine was structured so that during the coldest hours, at night and early in the morning, everyone stayed inside. During the day, when the sun warmed the air even slightly, people went outside to do the necessary work. This allowed heat to accumulate inside the dwelling. Cooking together also contributed to the overall heating. Even if the fire was lit for cooking, its heat was used to warm the entire room and all its inhabitants. After cooking, the hot coals and stones continued to give off heat for a long time. Sleeping places were often organized in the form of common bunks or platforms. People slept side by side, keeping each other warm. This was especially important for keeping the most vulnerable, the elderly and young children, warm. Winter was a period of active social life. People gathered together to listen to stories, do crafts, and play games. This activity also generated additional heat and strengthened the spirit of the community. The system of mutual aid was a key element of survival. If one family ran out of supplies or their clothes became unusable, the whole community came to their aid. No one was left alone in the cold. Even the layout of the dwellings in the winter camp was carefully thought out. They were placed close to each other so that they would protect each other from the wind. The space between them became warmer and more protected than the open plain. The psychological sense of unity and support also played an important role. People who know that they are not alone, that someone cares about them, find it easier to endure physical hardship. The feeling of camaraderie warmed them as well as a fur blanket. In this way, society itself was a heating device. Social ties, traditions of communal living, and mutual aid were as important to survival as the construction of the teepee. The most accessible source of heat has always been one's own body. Working muscles generate heat, and Native Americans knew very well how to use this internal heater. However, it was important to maintain a balance so as not to overheat and sweat. Life did not stop in winter. There were many necessary tasks that required constant but moderate physical activity: clearing snow, gathering firewood for outdoor fires, repairing equipment. All of this required movement and generated heat. Moving through deep snow was a special skill. Snowshoes were used for this, which distributed a person's weight and prevented them from sinking. Walking on snowshoes is an excellent cardio workout that warms you up well, but at the same time allows you to move at a moderate speed, avoiding excessive sweating. There were many winter games that combined entertainment and physical activity. Ball games, races, wrestling. All of this allowed young people and adults to stay in shape and warm up in a playful way. This was especially important on long, cloudy days. Even inside their homes, people tried not to sit idle. Basket weaving, skin processing, tool making. All of these activities required muscular effort. Monotonous, rhythmic work helped maintain a constant body temperature. They understood the danger of sweat. Sweating in the cold meant getting the inner layers of clothing wet. Moisture sharply reduced their insulating properties and led to rapid hypothermia as soon as activity ceased. Therefore, the pace of any work was measured. They moved smoothly without sudden jerks, constantly monitoring their condition. If it got hot, they stopped or took off one layer of clothing. Breathing exercises were also one way to keep warm. Deep, slow breathing helped oxygenate the blood and activate metabolism. It was a way to fire up their internal furnace without unnecessary movement. They even understood shivering correctly. It was not a sign of illness, but a natural reaction of the body trying to warm itself up by rapidly contracting muscles. They did not fight the shivering, but allowed the body to warm itself up. Thus, movement was a conscious process. It was a tool for generating heat, which had to be used skillfully and carefully. The main rule was, move to warm up, but don't move so much that you sweat. In order for the body's internal furnace to work efficiently, it needed high-quality fuel. The winter diet of indigenous peoples was specially adapted for survival in cold conditions. It was rich in fats and proteins, which release a large amount of energy when broken down. The basis of the winter menu was pemmican. This is a unique product that can be called an energy concentrate of antiquity. It consisted of dried and powdered bison meat mixed with melted fat and sometimes dried berries. Pemmican was incredibly nutritious and had a long shelf life. A small piece of this product could sustain a person's strength for many hours. The high-fat content ensured a slow and steady release of energy necessary for thermoregulation. Animal fats were an essential part of the winter diet. They were eaten on their own or added to soups and other dishes. Fat was not just food, but a strategic resource that was worth its weight in gold. Winter hunting focused on animals with large reserves of subcutaneous fat. Beavers, bears, and moose. Their meat and fat were the ideal fuel for the human body. Every part of the carcass was used as efficiently as possible. Fish, especially fatty varieties, was also an important part of the diet. Ice fishing allowed people to obtain fresh food even in the harshest frosts. Fish fat provided not only calories, but also essential vitamins. In addition to fats and proteins, carbohydrates were also included in the diet, but in smaller quantities. They were obtained from supplies stored since summer. Dried berries, nuts, and edible roots. These foods provided quick energy and enriched the diet with micronutrients. Hot food played an important role. Even if it was cooked outdoors, the very process of eating hot broth or stew warmed people from the inside. Liquid food also helped maintain water balance, which is important in winter. They understood that a hungry person freezes much faster. Therefore, regular and high-calorie food was as essential to survival as warm clothing. Skipping meals in winter could have serious consequences. Thus, diet was not a matter of taste, but a matter of survival. Every product in the winter diet was selected to provide the body with the maximum amount of energy to combat the cold. It was a real science of nutrition based on centuries of experience. We have looked at 10 unique methods that allowed the indigenous peoples of North America to survive the harshest winters without relying on a constant fire in their homes. It was a holistic system where psychology, clothing, architecture, diet, and social structure worked together to achieve one goal: preserving precious heat. Their knowledge was not just a set of tricks, but a deep philosophy of living in harmony with nature, even in its harshest manifestations. These lessons of ancient wisdom show that human ingenuity and adaptability know no bounds. They remind us that the most effective solutions are often the simplest and lie right at our feet. We just need to learn to look at the world as attentively as they did. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps you are interested in summer life, hunting techniques, or the spiritual practices of Native Americans. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new research.